Hello, everybody. It's raining in the Adirondacks, and it is raining hard. I don't know if it's left over from the hurricane or what it is, but I was going to go painting today, and it's cold and rainy. And if you hear noise in the background, that's the rain on the roof. You can see it's a little darker in here today. I have a guest. My guest is a world-famous, world-renowned painter. His name is Thomas Kegler. Welcome, Thomas.
Hello, Eric. Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for having me this morning.
Yeah,
it's a little nicer here. We're actually not that far west of you here in New York, and the sun's shining.
Yeah, well, let's hope that the sun will be shining, because today's my painting day.
Good,
and
good.
I'm going to show you guys when we get to it in a minute. I'm going to show you guys what I use to paint outdoors in the rain, because rain is the best time to paint. One of the best times to paint, because you get all this atmosphere. We're going to talk about some things with atmosphere today, but it's a really great time. And so I love to paint in the rain, except I don't want rain running down my painting, although I have done that. So Thomas, tell everybody a little bit about yourself. Where are you? You're in upstate New York. Where?
I'm over near Buffalo, actually closer to Toronto than New York City. I'm a high school art teacher and a professional painter. I feel very fortunate. I'm raising two amazing kids and able to do things that I absolutely love, which is teach and paint. And
you're a single dad, right?
I'm a single dad. Yeah. Unfortunately, my wife passed away a few years back, and we're blessed with a lot of things from that. It was obviously a very trying experience, and but I think those trying experiences in life, a lot of times they will bring out the best in you, and I trust in that. And I put my trust in God, and from that, I've been very much blessed. My kids are doing amazing. I'm doing really well, and again, I'm able to do things I absolutely love, which is to teach and share things that I'm passionate about with not only my kids, but obviously my students, and to explore and paint God's wonders in the form of landscapes.
So I want to show you guys just quickly before we drop off and I make my announcements. This painting, Thomas, how big is this painting?
This painting is 8 foot wide and about 32 inches high.
It's eight foot wide. And how long did that painting take you?
Well, because the intent of this was to create an instructional video when I did the painting. So, there were times where I had 5 cameras rolling at the same time while I was painting, and I was doing a lot of the shots myself, so I would have to pause and move it. So that's a long answer to your story. It took probably 5 times longer than it should have. It took about 6 months from the brush first hitting the canvas to the actual finish of it. The video that was produced through that is about 9 hours long, and it shows pretty much every aspect of the creation of a large studio painting that is based on plein air work. So I actually show all the steps, including on-site sketching, plein air painting, all the way through the concepting to the finished piece. And there is about a half-hour, 45-minute segment on the creation and making of the frame itself, which was custom made.
The video is phenomenal, because
Thank you.
It has so many, most of the videos that we do would be about painting a particular subject, and this one was also, it's called Painting Niagara. So you would get the idea that it's about painting a waterfall. But the reality is that, there's so many different techniques in that particular video. It's about the atmosphere. It's about the sky, the clouds, the trees, the rocks, the light, the water. I mean, there's just so many different things that came out of that. And so we'll talk about that more today.
Mm-hmm.
And what are you going to do for us today?
Well, when you asked me to do the demo, I wanted to somehow tie it in with the video, but also keep it current to what I'm envisioning right now. So make a long story short, my kids and I just got back from a life-changing trip out to Yellowstone. And one of the things I came back from that trip was a lifetime's worth of ideas. And I got lots of sketches and some plethora of photos, obviously, which will help direct a lot of the concepts. But I started working on a couple of Old Faithful studies here in the studio. And I think there's obviously a tie-in with the painting video because I can talk about the aspects of water. From, when it comes to a waterfall, it's cascading down, but in a spout, as in Old Faithful, it's going up. But there's also a phenomenon of it coming down, as well as the rising mist and the vapors, and we can talk a lot about that in the demo. So I've got a painting here. It's about halfway done, and I'll go to the next layer when we get to that point.
Yeah, and we're going to show some of your sketches and so on as well. And so I'll tell you what, I'll be back in just a minute. I'm going to take you off camera for a second, and then we will we'll get back to that. And I'm anxious to see it because I struggle with painting waterfalls.
Okay.
And I struggle with painting mist and making it look right. And so I'm very curious about this. So that'll be really terrific. Thomas is in upstate New York, and actually in Aurora, New York. And I had the privilege of visiting Thomas at his studio. As a matter of fact, Thomas kept our dogs. Brady and I were driving home, and I think the dogs pooped in your house. I'm so sorry.
I don't even remember that. They're all good.
But anyway, I had a chance to see walls and walls and walls of paintings. There's an area on the stairway when you go up to Thomas's studio, which he has done all of his family members. And is that right? It was all family members?
Yeah.
And I love that idea. And it's something I need to do, is just to make sure I get paintings of my mom and my dad and my brothers. And, my mom's no longer living, but I have paintings I've done of her, but not at the level that I can paint now. And of course, your level is about 3,000% higher than mine. So give us a little background. You said you're an art teacher in the high school system.
Yep. Yeah. I'm a high school art teacher. I've been doing that for about 20 years. And alongside that, my other career is painting. And I feel very blessed that I've been able to do both. And I think they work really well hand in hand. I really believe that being a teaching artist, they complement each other. So being able to articulate what is normally a very intuitive process, which is art making, ultimately will translate better on the canvas as well, because I find myself a lot of times really dissecting and thinking through the paint mixtures as well as the passage that are actually going on the canvas. So yeah, it's a wonderful complementary career thing.
I first learned about you because you were teaching at the Hudson River School Fellowship. Do you want to talk about that briefly?
Yeah, that I would say was probably the most profound advancement in my knowledge of painting in every aspect, because I'm very much self-taught. So the first year, I think it was 2008, that I get into the Hudson River Fellowship as a juried fellow, which was a miracle in itself because of the level of skill in that group of 24 artists, which were from all over the world. And the wonderful part of the Hudson River Fellowship is that there's no curriculum. It's essentially a group of amazing artists getting together, going outside and painting, sometimes solo, sometimes in groups, and then coming back, bringing what you did, laying them out in a big hall, and essentially having like a 3-hour, very informal critique and seeing what everybody did. And it really, there was always this sort of unspoken, but very healthy level of competition. But it was a give and take. Nobody was, guarding anything. So I made it a concerted effort to try to paint with someone new every day and learn from them, and, as far as materials or the way they looked at things. And these people were, and still are, amazing painters, and they were bringing in aspects of ateliers from all over the world, whether it was Japan or Europe or America, New Zealand, all these different countries that these artists came from. So they were bringing in materials and knowledge, and I was exposed to artists I'd never heard of before. So that really, and now the actual painting, we were painting pretty much 7 days a week, sun up to sundown, including rain or shine. And it was very, very prolific. We're producing just a lot of work. We started out just doing drawings for about a week, and then we went into grisaille and monochromatic studies, and then eventually into full color. And it really is a way to emulate what they were doing back in the Hudson River time. And Jacob Collins, who founded it, that's what he was trying to emulate. It was also a complement to what he was doing at his Water Street atelier at that time. And it complemented what he was doing during, essentially the school year, which was portraiture and still life. And this augmented it with exposure outside, which was very challenging.
Yeah, I have been absolutely blown away by the quality of the work that was
Yeah,
coming out of that fellowship. One of the aspects that you talked about, which I think is so important, is that many of us have a particular atelier or teacher or someone that we've studied with, and oftentimes we're sticking with that only. And we're kind of approaching things with blinders, and there are 1,000 different approaches, probably 100,000 different approaches to things. And that's one of the reasons we created the FACE conference originally, is because people would come from, a student of a former student or student from one of the ateliers would come and see someone else teach from another atelier, and they would pick up ideas and concepts, and it would expand their thinking and expand their ideas. The same is true for watching videos or watching these segments every day, because even if let's say you're a watercolor painter, watching an oil painter is going to inform your watercolor, and
absolutely.
vice versa.
Absolutely.
So I want to talk just briefly about a couple of things. First off, I wanted to just go back to this briefly. This is an 8-foot painting that Thomas did, and he did a video for us, which is called Painting Niagara. And that is available at lilyartvideo.com. I'll probably put that on the screen later, but it's really a start to finish, and took several weeks to accomplish this, or several months, I guess. And it's absolutely fabulous to really get that level of instruction. And today we're going to talk about painting mist and water. But I also wanted to tell everybody about this new book that you've done. It's called The Spirit in the Brush, and it's painting devotionals by Thomas Kegler. And Thomas gifted me a couple of copies of the book, including one of the signed ones that had a drawing with it in a special box. Thomas, why don't you let's see if I can find this video clip. Why don't you talk about this book real quickly?
Oh, sure. Thank you so much. And by the way, thank you, Eric, for writing one of the forwards in it. It's such a fine job, and I appreciate it. It was a real compliment. This book is a compilation of my paintings set in a 365-day devotional book. So essentially, each day of the year has a devotion. There's about 120 paintings total. And for each painting, there is a biblical verse for each day. So each painting has about 3 days of reads. And this is essentially a dedication to my late wife. And during her journey, she was doing a lot of daily readings and daily devotionals in the Bible. And this really evolved from that. And it's a way of me celebrating her life and the legacy she's left, but also a way of hopefully using my paintings to encourage people to look upward.
So they can get that at thomaskegler.com/book, right?
Yes,
Kegler.
yes. It's available on my website, and I self-published it. So at this current time, it's the only place to acquire it, but we may explore some other options in the future.
If someone would put that in the comments, that would be very helpful. thomaskegler.com/book. All right. So thank you for that. I love mine, and I love the devotionals. I find them very helpful. And so let's talk about what we're going to do today. You tell me what you want me to pull up. Do you want me to pull up the image of the geyser, the video of the geyser?
Actually, why don't we start? Well, sure. You can bring that up, and then we can come back to it, because I'll talk a little bit about what was inspiring on it. So recently, my kids and I went out to Yellowstone, and I now at this point realize why all the Hudson River greats would obviously be painting out east, around the Adirondacks. But I also always saw a few of these Yellowstone paintings. And once I went out there, I understood why. The landscape out there is absolutely stunning. And with the current situation of COVID, my kids and I were able to do a very quick plan of a trip. We stayed with a good friend, Tim Newton, out in Cody, and that was kind of our hub. And from there, we explored Yellowstone, and we got a cabin right next to Old Faithful. And outside our door, look out, and there it was, every hour and a half going off. So I came back with lots of sketches, and if you want to bring those up, I can then talk about a little bit of a process. One of those images, that one there, shows a few little thumbnails. Now, they look pretty small. They're about 1 inch by 2 inches, give or take. And I use tone paper, and a little bit of graphite, usually just one pencil, and then white accenting. Now, the beauty of this process is each one of those sketches takes a grand total of literally maybe 3 minutes each. So on the fly, in an hour, I can get several pages of concepts in one location. And I don't have to worry about color. I don't have to worry about details. It's about these big relationships of value and masses and composition. Then typically what I'll do, if you want to now scroll through those 3 sketches close up, you can kind of get an idea how they look. And then a lot of times on site, I'll do an ink wash drawing, like the next one coming up. So these typically take me an hour or 2. And it's a chance for me now to sit down in front of the subject and really get to know it a little bit more intimately. Again, without worrying about the distractions of color. I think a lot of times artists, including myself, get too caught up in trying to analyze color on the spot. And I do think it's an important thing, but color is subordinate to composition and value. They are definitely the most important thing in a compelling painting. So this is the way I typically gather reference. If I'm at a place in an extended stay, and I have a block of time to actually sit down and do oil paintings, I definitely would do that. But honestly, the time I spent with the Hudson River Fellowship and doing oil paintings outside for several summers, probably 5 summers straight, doing oil paintings outside, I've really acquired an invaluable knowledge of the phenomena I see out there and the nuances of color. And in many ways, they become ingrained. So there's no shortcuts. If you're going to be doing studio paintings or plein air, you have to put the miles in to really start to understand color and all those nuances that I just mentioned. And I'm still learning it. It's a never-ending endeavor, and that's part of the process.
So you're going to paint for us today, yes?
Yeah. So what I did when I got back is I developed a few underpaintings, knowing that I would probably do this for the demo and it would tie in with the video, which is obviously a much more expanded explanation of some of these processes. And I always say that my process is definitely not the only one. It's not the best one. It just works for me. And it's always changing. My materials change, my processes change. And that's what I love about oil painting, is it's a constant challenge, and it's always encouraging me to grow in my process. So I think I'll just kind of pan over to show you where I'm at with a couple of studies. This is the one I'm going to develop a little further. It's I work in layers. So this is, I would say, layer 2. The first layer, just going to grab another painting. Typically what I do for the first layer is something like that, which is grisaille. Now, sometimes I'll do these grisailles in earth tones like umbers. And in this particular case, it is simply a black and white. And a lot of times
is that done in oil?
This is oil, yeah. So this will eventually be glazed up in a series of layers. And by the way, these are really great to do on site as well, because again, you're worrying about a strong composition, you're not worrying about color. And I like to have a lot of freedom with my color because I believe that's the voice of emotion. And that's something I like to have, that artistic liberty in the studio itself. On site, I try to capture, if I'm doing an oil painting, I try to capture as accurately as I can, because that instills the understanding. But once the understanding is there, I believe it's important to then influx the artistic discretion for creating an emotion or mood in the studio.
I want to ask you a question about that real quickly.
Sure.
So you're plein air painting in grisaille. Are you ever plein air painting where you're actually laying down color in impasto, or are you doing everything with glazing?
So in the field, if I'm doing a full process, even in the field, I'm doing a layer process. And typically, I'm sorry, I'm not talking to the camera. Let me just turn this so I'm speaking with people. In the field, even when I do my workshops, which are plein air, I typically will do a demonstration in the morning that may take 2 or 3 hours, and it is a layered process. Mind you, I can't let the underpaintings dry completely. It's just the nature of oil paint. But I always will start with an imprimatur, which is staining the canvas with a brown or raw umber. I'll then do a grisaille. And then while that is sort of set,
wait, what's the difference between immature and grisaille?
So the imprimatur is simply staining the canvas. It's taking away the starkness of the white. It sets down a warm undertone. It's usually a raw umber. Every artist has their own.
Okay, so toning the canvas.
Exactly. So the tone is the imprimatur. The next stage, which is the grisaille, which is, it's an old term meaning gray painting. That could technically be gray. It could be black and white, but a lot of artists will use white with raw umber. And then while I cut that with mineral spirits. So that's actually setting and drying in the field, while I then take time and pre-mix the colors I see before me. And then typically that'll take a half an hour. By the time that's the underpainting and the grisaille is more or less set, I mix my colors, and then I can start applying that on top of that underpainting. So in the field, I can often get 3 or 4 layers, but I have to be careful that I don't scrub too hard, because obviously that would reactivate the under layers and create the mud we always
Let me ask
see.
you a question about that, because yesterday we had, oh, I'm blanking out now. Who did we had Amory Bowling on yesterday, and she does all these Grand Canyon pieces, and she also does a lot of glazing, but she lays down her underpainting in acrylic.
Yeah, that's a great idea. It's a great idea.
That way she's not dealing with everything drying.
Yeah, and they're completely compatible as long as you use that acrylic as any kind of water base underneath the oil. Yeah, right. Yeah, it's a great idea. Okay. So yeah, so as far as my process, that's more or less it in a nutshell. And obviously it's a very brief explanation, but if you have questions on that, obviously I can answer that, or the video really gets into it.
Yes, and people they can also ask questions in the comments, and I'll try to field them to you as you're getting your demo going here.
That'd be great. Okay. So back to this, I talked a little bit about the process. So this was a concepted piece. It started with a concepted thumbnail based on what I saw, and I started with a black and white underpainting. Now this one's a little more developed. This is more of a bright daytime scene. And this is a sunset where it's kind of sort of backlit. And this one's, I would say, maybe 80% done. I got a few more developments to do on it, but we'll do that after this layer dries, because this is still wet from this morning. Now this one is I would say on the second stage as well. The background is mostly developed, and I left the mist to be developed for the demonstration, and I'll talk about a little bit how I'll pull that through.
So just want for clarification for everybody, you toned your canvas with a raw umber.
Yep.
And then you did your painting in gray.
Yeah, so it would have been something like this.
Something like that. And then now you're staining on top of that. So the reason you're getting that brilliant light in the sun is because you're using a thin transparent glaze.
Correct. So to make something bright in the layer process, like if you're referring to these areas, usually what I do is I'll put that in as a pure white. And then once the white is set over a day or two, then I'll glaze on top of that, which is a transparent suspended pigment. Glaze on top of that a warm color, and it creates this luminosity that you really can't get by simply mixing that color with white. And that's one of the beauties of oil paint. Okay. And it works really well.
And so when you're glazing, what do you mix into your paint? You're putting a linseed oil or a medium?
Yeah, I use a medium. There's a lot of different ones you can use. I really like Natural Pigments oleo gel. Yeah. And I'm just going to pick a little bit up with my palette knife here. It's basically I'm getting near the camera. It's a clear gel, and you can use oleo gel. I also like the non-toxic walnut water washed gel. That's actually what I currently use. I'm trying to go a little more non-toxic in the studio these days, and that's essentially how you do the glazing mix.
Who makes that?
The water base I get from our Treehouse. The water base, it's a water washed walnut gel. And I've been using that for a couple of years along with the oleo gel, and I really like them both.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So let's get started. You've got we got about 18 minutes or so.
All right. Sounds good. So if you could bring up the video of Old Faithful again, if that's handy.
Okay. Well, you're asking a lot.
If you can, it's fine.
Okay. Wait a minute. I got the wrong one. Okay. This.
Yeah. Yeah. So when I'm in the field, water movement is quite a phenomenon in physics. And back to the Hudson River Fellowship, one of the beautiful aspects of the fellowship was that Jacob Collins, as an accent to our painting, would bring in professional speakers, but they weren't artists. He would bring in geologists, meteorologists, physicists, and one of them was a specialist in water. And that really opened my eyes to not just paint what I saw, but understand it before I painted it. And understanding movement of water is just so important, whether it's a subtle stream or, in Niagara's case, a torrent. In this case, we have rising mist. So understanding what's making it rise and what happens in the air, and then when it actually falls, is all part of the painting process. So I often will sit there and just stare at something like this for a long time and try to follow the clouds with my eyes and follow what's actually happening as it's rising and then eventually falling, and what's causing it to rise. So if you'll notice this, as Old Faithful is just thinking about doing its magnificent spout, obviously this is not its full height. What's happening is the water underneath the ground is boiling and essentially starting to get to the point where it can't contain it anymore. And when it first comes out, it's coming out as essentially like a stream from a hose. And once it gets to its apex, it pauses in air. And there's this unique phenomenon with water where it's attracted to itself. So it basically finds particles of water next to it, and it binds with it and becomes essentially a chunk of water, for lack of better terms, and it will fall. Now, all around that, you also have heated water, which is suspended, and that's actually rising. So you have this rise, fall going on, and different things causing that, and whether that is from the force or the heat. Then within that, you've got light interacting with it. Now, in this case, we have a left lighting coming from essentially the south. This is about 5 o'clock in the afternoon. And so you'll see that it's heavily lit with the particles on the left side, and then we see shadow forms depending on the thickness and density of the water on the right of those clouds. And then eventually, as it starts to fall, it gets thinner again. So during all of this, I am asking myself, why I'm seeing this and what's causing all these variations in value. Now, water, when it's suspended, is transparent. So within that, we also see aspects of the landmass, which is behind it. So those are the things I'm looking for. Now, obviously, this changes. Like the sun could, at this point, go behind a cloud. And that's going to change all those relationships. So I have to sort of decide on what I'm trying to capture and go with it, so that even if those aspects change. And that's kind of one of those things about taking a video, is it allows me to revisit it, slow it down, and really study what's happening in air, in this case with Old Faithful. So what I'm gonna do now is just translate that back down into my palette, and we'll just start mixing some colors that I think I'm gonna need for this. So
do you want to tell us your typical palette, please?
I've got a lot of colors, and it changes with the painting. I let the painting really dictate what is going to be happening on the mixtures. So in this particular case, I typically will lay them out in spectral order. I go from my warms to my cools. So I've got a series, and it changes all the time. That's why I'm always hesitant when somebody says, what color did you use to mix that? I'm always hesitant because it doesn't really matter. All that really matters is if the value is right and if the temperature is right. So I don't get caught up in recipes a whole lot, but I'll give you what I have. I essentially have transparent red oxide, alizarin crimson, cad orange, cad yellow. I put a green in here, although I probably won't use it. It's a cobalt green by Williamsburg, which I really like. Prussian blue. I have a ultramarine blue. This is radiant blue with, I believe that's Gamblin, and this is a violet. So.
And what kind of white do you use?
I love lead white, but again, I'm trying to get away from using toxic. So at this point, I am using the Winsor Newton Griffin Alkyd white, which is a titanium. And I really like that. It sets really nicely and it mixes really nice. So it's certainly not up to the working characteristics of lead white, but I'm actually real happy with it. Yeah. So as far as mixing goes, most of my background's done. So I really want to focus on what's happening with the clouds. So in this case, it's a sunset scene, which is different than the video that you were just looking at, which was the looping video of Old Faithful. So a lot of this is going to be concepted through. So typically what I'll do is I'll start with a few piles of white, and I will basically make several temperatures of grays. So I'll just make a few piles, and this will vary once I actually get underway too. You'll also see me pick it up and I'll go off screen because I'm actually comparing it on the painting to check its value relationship. So I think the first thing we'll do is just make a straight up ultramarine and white together to get a nice cool blue, which is sort of the dominant color cast that I'm seeing there. Now this is really powerful. When I hold it up there, it's glowing. So I may use a little bit of that chroma, which is just intense color when I say chroma, but I want to take that down a notch. Now I can gray that down a few different ways. I can actually mix black with it, or I can mix as complement, which would be some variation of orange. Really, either one will work. You know, if I take a little bit of orange into this, it's going to kill it. Takes away that harshness. And again, I'm not sure how this is translating on the screen, but that makes a really nice, slightly more neutral, cool gray. And when I hold it up to my painting, it's pretty spot on. So I'm going to put that in a separate pile. I'll keep a little bit of that chromatic blue as an accent within that. So this is sort of the dominant color that I'm seeing. And that's always usually how I start my painting, is to what I would say mix what I would call the blur. So if you were to take a photograph of that particular scene and blur it in Photoshop, it gets rid of accents like chromatic or light notes or dark notes and makes it all kind of one. And that's sort of the first thing I'll mix. The next thing I would do is mix variations of the darker notes and then variations of the lighter notes, which always vary a little bit. So in this case, I'll mix a little larger batch of that same thing. So again, ultramarine blue. Whoops, picked up. I think it's the right one. Okay. Ultramarine blue and then a little bit of orange to knock it down. Check my value. I want this a little bit darker. And then again, a little bit of that orange to pull it in. That didn't quite pull it in enough. So I will just use what I often do is just black to pull it down too. So it's maybe hard to tell. It's just very slightly darker. Again, I'm not sure how the camera screen is going to pick up those little subtleties.
Picking it up pretty well.
Okay, cool. I'm going to go one more darker, and this time I'm going to pull in a little bit of a Payne's gray, which I like to use sometimes, which cools it down. So I've really got 3 variations for that mist in this area. Now there is obviously some lighter areas where it's backlit. It's being backlit by a warm sun. So those particles of suspended water are being back illuminated. So I can actually just go ahead and pull in orange, which is just cat orange and white. Now this value is going to be way too light, but if I put it on thinly, especially if I mix it with a transparent carrier, it should translate just right and still let some of that underpainting show through.
Okay, you got about 10 minutes.
Okay, thank you. And then the other thing is, I noticed that this radiant blue right out of the tube really works nicely for my cooler areas. Now, in the end, I probably would have several more variations of this, but it's for a quick demo that shows you at least my thought process. Now, if we come back up to the painting, I'll get working on applying some of that and talking about some of the phenomena. What I'll do is I'll start with some of the actual spout and then work my way over to the areas where we've got some mist going on.
Sorry,
so where I'm putting,
are you going to be painting mostly glaze at this point, or are you going to be painting?
So at this point, well, it comes to the, get me into another conversation. The definition of a glaze typically is a transparent dark put over a light. The sister process is called scumbling. So scumbling is an opaque light put over a dark.
Right.
And they work hand in hand. So for instance, if I were to put this color here thinly on top of this, it's a glaze because it's darker. Take that exact same color and put it over here. Now it's lighter than the background. Now it's a scumble. Exact same mixture. So
Okay.
it's a tough one to answer when you ask that. Does that make sense?
I've never heard that, but thank you. Yes.
Okay. So to answer your question, am I doing a glaze or scumble? It depends where I put it in this particular painting. All right. So I'm just going to start by placing some uprise here. Now, as it's rising up, it comes out as a shoot and then it pauses in air depending on the pressure. So if there's a pause in air, I'm just going to go ahead and put like a little half moon here. You get these little pauses like this. Again, I don't know how well it's picking up. And a lot of times I'll put those little half moons in, then I take a little rubber tip brush and I use that to come in and almost create these little motion blurs and sort of activate the illusion of that motion within that paint passage. So these rubber tip brushes work really well for this process of painting moving water. Now, notice over here that that's a scumble because it's a lighter blue note on top of a darker. Now, as soon as I put it over here, initially, you could call this just an opaque passage. But as soon as I do something to make it transparent, so now by pulling that, I'm adding to the illusion of transparency, and technically that becomes a glaze in this area with the exact same mixture. So I can explore this phenomena of these sort of eye shoots, these offshoots here, not eye shoots, coming over here to fool the eye into making this look like spouting water pausing in air. And again, this underpainting is pretty much dry, so it allows me to do that. And the other thing I should mention that I didn't cover is that before I do scumbling or glazing on a dry painting, I typically will put down what's called a couch or couche, depends on how you translate it, which is essentially rubbing the surface with a little bit of the carrier of the medium, in this case, the walnut gel, and then wiping it off. So it basically prepares the surface to accept that scumbler glaze. All right, so the next thing I'll do is work into some of the darker areas, where the water is thickest, and it could be off to the side here in the center. I'll get some of these darker areas, and it's subtle, might be hard to pick up on screen. And maybe some over in here. The beauty of clouds, or in this case, mist, which is essentially the same thing, is that it gives you so much artistic liberty to work with your composition because they're constantly morphing. You have discretion. I'm just using a soft brush now to sort of manipulate those passages. You can intentionally completely manipulate your composition because of that constant movement. That's why I love painting mist so much. So all I'm doing is getting these more intense shadow, or basically the shadow area in suspended water is a higher density. It's just thicker water, essentially, or more of it. Now down in here, I might pull in some more lighter notes. Notice that I love to put the paint on and then manipulate it. And whether that's with a rubber tip brush or a dry brush. And this creates that illusion of mist because it's really moving that paint around and allowing the underpaintings to still work with it. And I'll just work that. So this is where the mist is still rising. But we also have a phenomena, as it's rising, it starts to cool. And then over in this area, you're going to have some of that start to drop. So I can create some of that going on as well. And then over in here, what we have is basically the water that's shooting up is landing on the ground and running down on here, but it's still really hot. So now you've got all this boiling water running down and evaporating. And again, the beauty of all this dancing of vapors from an artistic standpoint is you just have so much freedom to work with that. And again, I'm just manipulating that with a soft brush once it's on there, creating these veils of suspended water. And just trying to mimic what I'm seeing there.
So you got about 3 minutes.
All right. So this is actually a really complicated thing to explain in a short amount of time, but I'm hoping that at least gives you some kind of idea of the approach. Now, the beauty of this, again, is you have that complete artistic liberty of using the mist compositionally. You can create accents wherever you want them. So for instance, in my mind, I love all the dancing in the mist, but I really want you looking over here. So in that case, what I can do is use my palette knife, because your eye is attracted to thick paint as well as contrast. You'll notice that right now my highest contrast I want right here. That's where I want you looking. I'll put in a very bright, warm note with the palette knife. It's very small, but it's an eye catcher. And that's being put right next to the darkest note. Everything else is sort of downplayed in terms of soft edges, soft transitions of values. But you as an artist have that complete control to tell us where to look by simply controlling those little art elements such as contrast, value, chroma. So how are we doing on time?
Well, we probably should start wrapping up.
All right, cool. Transition back over to me. Okay.
All right. Well, that was fabulous. I could watch that for hours. So that's all outlined, not in geyser form, but in waterfall form.
It's all about, you know, atmosphere and water essentially suspended.
Yeah. So where you show where you did this 8-foot painting, and it's called Niagara, and it's a phenomenal piece of work. I mean,
Thank you.
absolutely
Thank you.
incredible what you went through, and to show all the stages of development of the drawings and the studies and all the pieces to do that. It is a phenomenon. So I'll put on screen, and you guys, if you're interested in that, you just go to lilyartvideo.com and search Thomas Kegler, and you can find that video. Tom, this has been fabulous. Thank you so much.
I really enjoy it. I love doing the demos. So thank you so much for bringing me on, Eric.
Okay, get a day off, come up to the Adirondacks. We'll go painting.
I'm hoping to make that happen in the next couple of weeks.
Okay, great.